Alan. So here I am. I'll be tackling about the hazardous waste. So hazardous waste is a toxic waste that comes from industries and household. It can be in the solid or liquid or sludge and contains harmful substances like chemicals, heavy metals, and germs. These wastes are dangerous because they can cause pollution, sickness, and harm to people, animals, and environment. Examples include used batteries and paint or old cleaning products and waste from factories. It is important to dispose of hazardous waste properly to avoid accidents and protect our surroundings from contamination. And that's all, and let's proceed to the next slide.
Hi everyone, my name is Yuli Ann Mangaran and today I'll talk about nuclear, industrial, and medical waste. First, nuclear waste comes from power plants and weapons. It stays dangerous for thousands of years and can cause cancer or birth problems. An example is the waste from nuclear power plants. Next, industrial waste is produced by factories and chemical processes. It includes things like solvents, oil, or wastewater. For example, wastewater from oil refineries or leftover chemicals from making medicines. Lastly, medical waste comes from hospitals and clinics. This includes used needles, bandages, and blood products. If not handled properly, it can spread diseases. For example, used syringe or gloves from hospitals. That's all for my part. These types of waste need to be managed carefully to keep people and environment safe. Thank you.
Good day everyone, my name is Gwyneth D. Canelio and today we're going to discuss about the construction waste, electronic waste, and universal waste. First, what is construction waste? Construction waste refers to the debris material generated during construction, renovation, and demolition activities. It includes asbestos, lead pipes, and certain chemicals must be properly managed and disposed of under safety guidelines. So, what is asbestos? Asbestos can be found in older buildings and it can cause respiratory damage. And lead can also be found in old pipes and paint, and lead can cause neurological damage. And certain chemicals used in construction can be toxic and require special handling. And next is electronic waste. Electronic waste devices like computer and circuit boards, like it contains toxic materials like lead, mercury, and cadmium. Improper disposal in landfills can lead to pollution and health risks. And next is universal waste. Universal waste, like common items in universal waste, are batteries, light bulbs, and thermostats are widely used but often improperly discarded. When burned or buried, this item can release toxins into the environment. By adopting responsible e-waste, universal, and construction waste management practices, we can reduce pollution and conserve resources and protect human health. That's all for my part. Thank you.
Good everyone, my name is Jessa and I will be talking about the hazardous waste disposal sites. So what is hazardous waste disposal sites? This facilitates the safely store and dispose of toxic materials under strict procedures on depending on the type of waste they handle. But what does that mean? It means that hazardous waste disposal, it is where they keep or store all the chemical waste that is already being used. And why is it under the strictly procedure? Because all the chemical they store or keep is very harmful and dangerous. And if it's interacted with people, it can possibly lead to illnesses that can cause deaths. So now, let's proceed to radioactive contamination. Radioactive contamination usually caused by spills, accidents, or fallout involving unstable radionuclides that spread through gases, liquids, or particles. So, what are the possible results of neglecting radioactive contamination? This can result from medical use or nuclear procedures, and when containment is possible, materials may be diluted to safety levels. But if it is properly sealed, radioactive waste is not considered as radiocontamination.
Containment refers to keeping radioactive materials within controlled boundaries to prevent contamination. If materials contaminate escape unreactable outside containment, the area is considered contaminated. For the further explanation, containment means keeping radioactive materials safely inside special barrier so they don't escape and cause pollution or harm outside. For example, a nuclear power plant, the reactor is enclosed in a thin steel and concrete structure called containment buildings. So this building prevents any radioactive gases or particles from leaking out, protecting people and the environment. The second is the techniques include containment techniques keep radioactive materials safe and stop them from spreading. Liquid stored in strong tanks or containers with a leak detection system. Airborne materials managed with a big box under negative pressure using high efficiency filters monitored to ensure safe operation. The third one is land disposal. The most common method using landfills, waste fields treatment units to permanently contains hazardous waste and prevent pollution. The other means of land disposal, burying the waste and place that naturally and safely trap it and prevent pollution and keep everyone safe. For example, a waste management solution pilot plant in the United States.
So now, let's talk about the storage of the hazardous and nuclear materials. So, storage is the temporary holding of hazardous waste before treatment or final disposal. Must follow strict regulations using secure containers and tanks or buildings. And now, let's talk about the underground injection. Underground injection is mainly used for liquid hazardous waste regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act to protect drinking water.
Hey everyone, my name is Alessandra Mary Johnson and I will be talking about types of disposal facilities. There are different types of disposal facilities, which are special places made for handling specific kinds of waste. For example, there are facilities for batteries, plastics, lighting materials, medical waste, metals, solvents, and even used oil. These places make sure the waste is properly treated so it won't harm us people or the environment. Some of these facilities are managed by the government, while others are run by private companies. Its example is when we have used or old cell phone batteries, we can just throw them in regular trash bins because they contain harmful chemicals. Instead, they should be brought to a battery disposal facility. Next, for my topic is about how to find disposal sites. So, how to find disposal sites? If we need to find where to throw a certain types of waste, we can visit government websites. They usually have list of disposal sites and the kinds of waste they accept. Some cities also have drop-off points for hazardous waste, but sometimes we might need to go to another area or country if our waste requires
special treatment. For example, if you have used motor oil, you can just pour it into the drain. You can bring it to a nearby waste oil collection site or a government accredited facility that handles chemical waste. So, lastly, for my topic is all about ra- radioactive waste. What is radioactive waste? So, radioactive waste comes from things like nuclear power plants, research laboratories, or hospitals. This kind of waste is dangerous because it stays radioactive for a long time and can harm us humans and the environment. That's why it must be stored safely and isolated until its radioactivity decreases. There are two types, which is low-level waste, which is stored for a short time, and high-level waste, which needs to be stored for thousands or even millions of years, usually deep underground. For example, hospitals that use radiations for X-rays or cancer treatments produce low-level radioactive waste, while nuclear power plants create high-level waste that must be stored deep down underground for safety. So that's all for my topic, and I will give the floor to the next reporter. Thank you.
Hi everyone! So as we continue our discussion about hazardous and nuclear materials, allow me to introduce myself first. My name is Geraldine Valiente, and today I'll be talking about the radioactive contamination, what it is, how it happens, and why it is important for us to understand its effects on the people and on the environment. So radioactive contaminations happens when radioactive substances are spread into the environment, into the surface, in the water, in the soil, or air, or even inside the human body. So it means the unwanted radioactive material is present where it shouldn't be. Radioactive contamination is the presence of radioactive substances on or in materials, people, places, which can harm through continuous radiation exposure. So that is radioactive contamination. First, what is the radioactive substances? So radioactive substances are materials that have unstable atoms. These atoms naturally break down or decay, give off radiation in the form of particles or energy. So this process continues until the atoms become stable. So radioactive substances are useful but dangerous. They play a big role in medicine, research, and energy, but must be handled with great care to avoid harmful effects on people and the environment. So that is the radioactive substances. So here, again, at the radioactive contamination, it is the presence of radioactive substances on or in materials, people, places, which can cause harm through continuous radiation exposure. There are two types of radioactive contamination. The first one is the external contamination, which the radioactive substances settles on the skin, clothes, or any objects, while the other one is the internal, meaning the radioactive substances enters the body through breathing, eating, or any open wounds. So nuclear contamination cannot just happen naturally. So there are sources or causes of radioactive contamination. So we have the nuclear accident, improper disposal, nuclear weapon testing, leaking containers of radioactive materials, and industrial or medical spills involving radioactive substances. And by the way, if the contamination enters the body and cannot be removed, it can be permanent. So the health effects for this one is like the damage to cells and tissues, increased risk of cancers, genetic mutations, and radiation sickness. So that is the radioactive contamination. So again, radioactive substances are useful but dangerous. It is useful in medicine, research, and energy. So it must be handled with great care to avoid effects on people and the environment. So for the next one, we have the other topics, which is the airborne contamination. So now we will be discussing, or we will talk about the airborne contamination. So what I've said earlier, the radioactive contaminations happens when radioactive substances spread into the environment, into the surface, into the water, soil, human body, or even in air. So now, let's talk about the airborne contamination. So airborne contamination, of course, it will happen when radioactive particles are released into the air. So these tiny particles can be inhaled by humans or animals, allowing radiation to enter the body and cause serious health risks such as lung damage or even cancer. So one of the example of airborne radioactive contamination is the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. So when the reactor exploded, large amounts of radioactive iodine and cesium were released into the air. These particles were carried by the wind and inhaled by the nearby residents, causing serious health problems such as thyroid cancer and radiation sickness. So this incident showed how dangerous airborne contamination can be when radioactive materials spread through the atmosphere. So that is the airborne contamination and the example of airborne contamination. So to control exposure, workers and responders use respirators to prevent inhalation and perform continuous air monitoring using radiation detectors to measure and limit the spread of radioactive materials in the atmosphere. That concludes my discussion about radioactive contamination, specifically airborne contamination. I hope this helped you understand how radioactive particles in the air can pose health risk and why proper safety measures are important. Thank you for listening. Have a good day!
Good day everyone, I am Lojel and Pihilig and I'll be discussing the last part of our topic, which focuses on internal human contamination, radiation hazards, and the effects of contamination. So this topic is very important because they show how radiation affect both of our body and mental health if it not properly controlled. So first we have internal human contamination. So, internal human contamination happens when radioactive materials enter our body. This can occur through breathing, eating, drinking, skin absorption, or medical injuries. Once inside the radioactive particles, it releases energy that can damage our cells and organs. So, example, after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, many people were exposed to radioactive iodine through contaminated milk and food. Workers in nuclear power plants might inhale radioactive dust if safety measures fail. And in medical fields, accidents with radioactive substances can lead to internal contamination. So how to prevent internal human contamination? So first, avoid eating or drinking in areas with radioactive materials. And second, use protective clothing and proper ventilation in workplaces handling radiation. So next, we have radiation hazard. So radiation hazards refers to the risk caused by different types of radiation. These are three main types. First, the alpha radiation. Second, the beta radiation, and last, the gamma radiation. So first, alpha radiation, the weakest, can be stopped by paper, but dangerous if inhaled or swallowed. Example, radon was inside homes can release alpha particles harmful when breathed in. So second, the beta radiation can pass through skin but stop by aluminum. Example, used in some medical treatments but dangerous in high doses. And next, the gamma radiation, the strongest, penetrates deeply and needs thick materials like lead or concrete to block it. Example, emitted from nuclear reactors and can affect people far from the source. So, next, the last part, the effects of contamination. Radiation contamination can cause biological and mental health effects. So, first, the biological effect. Radiation damages body cells, causing burns, sickness, or even cancer. So, it depends on how much radiation enters the body and how long the exposure lasts. Some radioactive particles stay in the body for years and cause long-term damage. And next, the mental health effects. Even the fear of radiation can cause stress, anxiety, and depression. After major nuclear disasters like Chernobyl or Fukushima, people experience trauma and social isolation, even if the radiation exposure was low. So example, during the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, many residents suffered from cancer while others developed long-term fear and anxiety about radiation. So, in summary, radiation contamination can enter our bodies through air, food, or contact, and it can lead to both physical and emotional harm. Understanding how radiation works and following safety measures are key to protect human health and the environment. That's all. Thank you.